Hello and welcome to Black Belt Nutrition. My name is Patrick Dahlin. Today we're going to look at weight loss studies where we've crunched the numbers with AI and machine learning. And this is not the same as asking ChatGPT or something like that, which is a good way to lose weight, because all that it will do is to read some abstract from a paper, and that we can do ourselves, of course. So what we have done here is that I have taken over 100 weight loss studies and put those numbers in some machine learning / AI techniques for it to learn which way is the best way to lose weight. And we've also looked at fat mass and lean mass, because usually you want to lose fat but not the lean mass. And if you're new to this channel, I need to warn you, because most of my videos are intended to be easy to understand. But this one is an exception. This one is on an advanced level. So it might be difficult to follow what I'm talking about here, because I will talk here as if I was talking to one of my peers within pharmaceutical research and development. So I just want to say that if this video frightens you, I will put out others about weight loss that are easier to grasp. So what have we done here? I have taken these studies and put a handful of numbers straight into them, and it has been the macronutrients, carbohydrate, protein and fat, calorie intake, exercise, cardio exercise or resistance training exercise. There are of course other things you can look at, but these are the ones in this study, and all these together seems to give very good models to explain most of the weight loss differences between different studies. I might come back and do this with feeding more data, more input variables later on, but it takes quite some time to find all the studies and the inclusion criteria and so on and so forth. The techniques I use is some standard machine learning techniques. I've also used some other type of techniques just to compare if the models become very similar, which is an indication on that they're robust. If they become very different, it's less, the data is less secure. And the other things I used have been principal component analysis, mainly to look for outliers and patterns in overall. It's always good to do a PSA analysis on all data. I also used PLS, partial least square, in particular OPLS, orthogonal projection to latent structure, namely because it's easier to understand the data where you have all the correlated structured in one component, and then you have the uncorrelated but structured data in other components, and then you have the noise, of course, because it's only in the world of academia where you have structured data and noise. In real life you also have structured data that are not correlated to your output variable. So you have structured data that are relevant, structured data that are disturbances, and then noise. This middle thing is always treated as it doesn't exist in the academia. So you never see them in academia reports. But I have used them here because I use the methods I've been trained to use in pharmaceutical and other type of industries. Because I've also done cross-validation. The R-squared for these models are quite high, about 0.9, meaning that 90% of the variation in weight loss are explained by the model. But you can just add components and R-squared goes up, also when you include artifacts and structured disturbances in the data, and even noise. But this, of course, you cannot afford to put disturbances and artifacts in data if you're going to make decisions that will impact the company with millions, if not billions of dollars, or maybe even human life if you work with those type of drugs. So the method I've used is also something called cross-validation, where you remove pieces of the data and predict them. Maybe you take out 20% of the studies and then use the other 80 studies to predict the 20. So you basically tell the model what will be the outcome if this weight loss study was performed, and it will tell you even before you have done any weight loss study. So basically, if someone is going to do a weight loss study and started today, I can take those data, input them, and tell the researchers this will be your outcome with quite high degree of confidence before they even done the study. Because that is a way to make sure that the model actually works. And here the R-square for the predictability is between 0.7 and 0.8, which is still very high considering what type of data we're dealing with here. Meaning that it can predict 70 to 80% of the outcome in a weight loss study before testing the results. Okay, so that's short about the validation of the data. So if we look at some control plots, but we'll start with the coefficient plot, and then we will jump a little bit back and forward between weight, body fat, and lean mass. So if you look at the control plot, if we start on the left side, we have carbohydrate first, protein, fat, energy, the calories, resistance training, and cardio training. These are the 6 input variables. Then the rest you see here are interactions, and that means if you have synergies or not between those, which you can see we have quite a few strong synergies. And the way this model is set up is so that if something points upwards, it means high weight. If it points downwards, it means low weight. Now, this doesn't mean that people increase in weight, but it means that if something points upwards, it increases the weight compared to the average. So if the average weight loss in all these 100 studies were 5 kilos down, and the component is showing upward, it means, okay, if you increase that component, maybe the average weight loss will just be 3 kilos or 2 kilos, because it's above the average, and therefore it points upwards. If it's below the average, it points downwards. So carbohydrate, if you increase carbohydrate, that means that you will have less weight loss. But we'll come to the interaction, because this is not always the case, but in general. But there are some important exceptions from that general coefficient, which we'll come to when we look at the interactions. Protein, in general, increase protein, more weight loss. And that's true also for fat loss. Fat, it's weaker than protein, but the same, more fat means more weight loss. But there are some caveat to that too, when you look at the interactions. It's not always true, but sometimes. Calories or energy, not surprisingly, if you increase the energy, less weight loss. Resistance exercise, also, if you increase the resistance exercise, less weight loss. But that is because the lean mass is preserved, or maybe even increased. Fat loss, though, is the same, or even slightly enhanced with resistance training. Cardiovascular training will, in fact, do the opposite. It will help with the weight loss, mainly because of fat loss, but it might also take some more lean body mass with it. So that's the main factors, the main coefficients. The first interaction here is between carbohydrates and protein. And that basically means that if carbohydrate is high and also protein, then in that particular situation, that combination of high carb and high protein together will do a good weight loss. So that will, so to say, take out the negative effect of carbohydrates if you also go high protein. And then obviously you need to go low fat, because there's just one macronutrient left and you can't have them all high, because then you become over 100%. Because all of these sum to 100% since they are percent of the total energy. Then you have carbohydrate and energy, which means that if your energy is higher, which means you're still on a deficit, but if it's higher compared to the average energy intake in this weight loss study. But if that is so because it's high in carb, then that is also a decent combination. The next one is for fat and energy. If your energy intake is high because of fat mainly, basically the ketogenic diet, then that is also a good combination that will also help you to lose a lot of weight. And then you have fat and resistance exercise and energy and resistance exercise. That basically means that if you eat more energy and or resistance exercise, you will lose less weight compared to if you eat less energy. So and that probably is because if you increased the calories here, and are not so heavily on net negative calories, you can increase lean body mass at the same time as you burn fat. And then you also see something between energy and cardio. So that means even though energy is high, if cardio is also high, that will then diminish the negative effect of eating more calories. And then you also see something a little bit interesting between resistance exercise and cardiovascular exercise. If you do both, because in some of the studies they did one of the two, and in some they did both. If you do both, that has a synergistic effect for you to lose weight. So, even though I've gone through this, it can still be half hard to visualize in your head exactly what this means. So we look at a few contour plots as well. The first one here is normally when you do contour plots, you have a square. So you look at two things. You look at three things: carbs, fat, and protein. So it's a little bit confusing maybe if not used to look at this. And what we look at here is body fat loss. How much body fat you lost. And all these studies, by the way, are 2 months. And if they've been slightly above or below 2 months, they have been extrapolated to 2 months. So all the numbers you see here are for 2 months. So if it says -4, it means -4 kilos of fat in 2 months for this particular setting. Because there is also the 6 input variables, you can only study 3 at the same time easily. The other 3 are the calories, which is reasonably higher at almost 1600 calories. Some of the data goes down to 400 calories. You also have resistance training and cardiovascular training. So if you change the calories or how much you train, then this map will also change how it looks, which macronutrient that becomes more or less important. But I will comment on that when I go through this. And what this graph basically says is that the green areas are the best ones to lose fat, to lose body fat. And you can see this one up here and one down here. And the white area is the poorest place to lose body fat. And the white area is almost more important to remember where it is than the green ones. And there's 2 reasons for this. One is that regardless of if you cut back on calories or increase calories, if you increase training, decrease cardio or resistance training, the white space is at the same place and it's white always. All the models, all the variation, it always is a poor place to lose body fat. Whereas the green actually moves around a little bit depending on the other factors. And what is the white area here? Well, it covers from 45% fat down to 10% or something like that. So it's a reasonably low fat area. It's quite high in carbohydrates. It's above 60% to 70%. And it's low in protein. It's below 10% protein. So this is the worst area to be in if you want to lose body fat. Ironically or tragically, this is almost the same as the recommended weight loss diet by most health authorities. And it's the worst attempt you can do based on over 100 studies. Remember, this is body fat. You will still lose weight if you cut calories, but it will be lean mass to a much larger extent. So one cardinal rule: don't go below 10% of protein intake. You will lose your muscle mass and not any body fat at all, maybe. Regardless how you combine all the other macronutrients, what if you eat whole food, not whole food, if you're swinging as a monkey or training or not training, doesn't matter what you do, it will be a poor outcome of that weight loss study. So that's the key here to remember, and that looks the same regardless of how you vary the other factors. Then if you look at the 2 so-called optimal places here, but they're more tricky because they move around a little bit depending on the other settings. One of them is also quite classical down here, because here you're below 10% of carbohydrate, meaning that this is a ketogenic, the ketogenic studies that are in here. And also you can see that the protein is higher. It's from, I would say 25%. The optimum for this therapeutic setting seems to be 30% protein, 10% carbs, and then 75%, the rest is fat. That is the optimum precisely here. But here we're quite high in energy at 1600 calories. If you cut that down, let's say 800, then this changes a little bit. And what happens is that you need to add more protein. And the reason for that is that these numbers are percentage of what you eat. And if you eat 1600 calories and if 30% of that energy is from protein, that is some amount of grams, let's say 150 grams. If you then cut to 800 calories, which is half of it, and eat the 30% protein, that cuts in half to 75% grams of protein. So therefore you need to increase it to keep the protein in absolute values fairly constant. It needs to be pretty high, approximately at least 1.8 grams per kilo body weight, or at least per kilo of ideal body weight, meaning the body weight you would have if you were not overweight, if you're overweight. Or 1 gram per pound is another way to express that if you're more used to the pound system. So therefore the percentage of protein will vary quite much depending on the energy. It will also vary some. If you do resistance training or not, you will need ideally have some more protein if you do resistance training. Also for cardio, it's the same. And consequently, if protein goes up, the other needs to go down because they can't add up to more than 100%. So that means that on a lower calorie ketogenic diet, you need to you will eat less fat actually, and maybe even less carbohydrate, but for sure you need to cut back on the fat because you increase the protein. The other green spot here is the opposite. That is a fairly low fat diet. Low fat, you see it's low fat and the high fat, the one people always argue about. But and I can also tell you, every time you see someone saying that low fat is good, they compare it with the green area here, which is a low fat area. But for that to be good, you need to be high in protein. Here like 40%. And they compare it with what they call a high fat study that is over in the white area, maybe with 50% fat and low in protein. And the ketogenic people do the same. They go to their green area with the ketogenic studies and say low fat study started work, but they do then compare it with a low fat study that is low in protein in the white area. So you see, since the white area is the worst of all diets anyone has made up always have a study where they show that this particular diet is better than the recommended reference diet. And often people think that the recommended reference diet is a very good diet. So they think, oh shit, here's someone who made a study that is even better. So this must be the best diet. It doesn't matter if it's vegan or keto or carnivore, South Beach, you name it. They always have a reference study to either the average American or average European diet, which is both the average diet and the recommended diet are in the white space. So it doesn't help that much if you change. It could help for other blood markers if you eat more whole food and things like that. But if you just talk purely weight loss, it doesn't matter much if you eat the average diet in the Western world or the recommended diet, because their ratio of carbs, fat and protein aren't that different. It's more that they recommend better food because they recommend you to eat whole food and not so much processed food. For the most part, even though they have this tendency to recommend wheat, which is very processed. So therefore, anyone who's ever created any diet always have a reference study where they say this diet is better than the recommended heart healthy diet or recommended whatever diet. Because no matter what you come up with, it will be better. It's that tragic actually. So more interesting of course would be if you compare the real low fat with the real high fat and not always take something in between. So just because you are in one camp or the other, you will then take the reference group to do something in between, because then you will, so to say, win and it will look like you are right. But there are several right ways to do this, and just one wrong way actually. All other ways are pretty good except the wrong way. So the other green sweet spot here is also high in protein, and actually it needs to be higher in protein compared to the ketogenic study. The only way to reach one of these green spots and be reasonably low in protein, down to 20%, is by going on a ketogenic diet. And there's a special reason for that, because ketones will help you fuel, in particular the brain, so you don't need protein or carbs to go and do that to the same extent. Then you can save those, because carbs is also protein sparing. There are 9 essential proteins, amino acids, but every protein molecule in your body consists of 20 amino acids. 9 are essential, 11 are not. But to make those non-essential ones, you need carbohydrates in one form or the other. So therefore, carbs are actually protein sparing. It can be. But in this case, the only way to get down to low protein levels is when you go on ketones, because then the carbs you eat can be used for the other purposes than go to the brain, because the ketones will do that instead. Of course, all other options you need to be higher in protein to have an effective fat loss diet. And you can see here that the low fat diet then ideally should be around 40 or all the way up to 50%, 30 to 50% in protein. But this also depends, as I said before, on the calories you eat and if you're resistant strain or not. So here you see 1 white space, keep away from that, and 2 green spaces, but also everything blue in there is not is also pretty good places. And also if you add more training to this, you can be more comfortable wherever you want actually. The same if you cut the total amount of calories, the green space will also go more towards the middle. If we also, here is just body fat, which is important, but if you also add the criteria that lean mass should be preserved at the same time as you lose body fat, you will get this map instead, where all this blue here is areas where you can lose good amount of body fat but also preserve your lean body mass. You don't lose any lean mass. And then, as you can see, also the middle areas where you have a mix, all this high protein with all combination basically of carbs and fat are pretty good, all of them, as long as you don't go too low in the protein. And the ones that are a little bit more difficult are the ones where you're kind of high in both carbs and protein, where you're like this 40% of each or something like that. Those are always a little bit more tricky, simply because there are biochemical reasons for it. You kind of flood the mitochondria from 2 ways. When you eat carbs, they go through glycolysis, end up to pyruvate and then acetylcoenzyme A to enter the mitochondria and the Krebs cycle. Fats go through beta oxidation to the same place, end up as coenzyme A. So when both of them equal, both of them are high, and not one of them is high and the other low, you will kind of flood the mitochondria from 2 ways. It's like 2 rivers going merge into one, and that overfloods this one river when those 2 lanes merge to one. And particularly with processed food, because then they go faster and end up at the same time. When you eat whole food, they go slower, and also they will digest at different times, so they will also end up in the mitochondria, not at the same time. But that has more metabolic consequences than weight loss, but it also determines why the weight loss isn't so nice, why you eat lean mass or other things, or how much inflammation markers goes down and those type of things. So they are important, but once again, I've tried here to focus on just weight loss, and particularly then fat loss and preserving lean mass. So you can see here that it's pretty similar, both of the maps, even if you add the criteria that you want to have as good fat loss as possible with preservation of body mass. It is they are quite similar here, so this is a good map for both options. You actually have more freedom. They're more similar even when you add the criteria of not losing body mass. And sometimes you might also ask, why does this triangle stop here? And it's different reasons, but the main reason is that there are no studies in all the corners. There are no super extreme studies where you only eat fat or only eat carbs, only eat protein. I mean, on a carnivore study, I guess, but I didn't find much to put in there. You could have like 90% protein and maybe 10% fat if you eat just lean cut of meat. But usually don't do that as a carnivore. You will eat the fat also, you become really boring to just eat lean cuts of meat. So that is why you don't have them all away. Another questions I know I often get when I talk about these things is that sometimes there are areas more protein is good, but isn't it always better? Like in this setting, why isn't it better with 60% protein instead of 30? Well, it will be if you cut the calories even more, because then you need to keep the absolute amount of protein pretty constant. But you can still ask the question, why isn't it even better with even more here? And there's a reason for that, a biochemical reason that makes the body struggle a little bit. And that is, if you actually mentioned it in another video here about how much protein does women need after workout, where you saw this effect in that study. Namely that if you eat too much protein, which is not that easy to do, but if you manage to do it, some of that protein will not be used for building mass. It will be catabolized and be used as energy, either direct or converted to carbohydrates. Some amino acids are ketogenic, they can only be burned in the ketogenic pathway. Some are glucogenic, they need to be turned to some type of carbohydrate, or at least a pyruvate that is part of the glycolysis. And many of them can go both ways. Either way, that is catabolism. When the body takes protein and breaks them down, that is catabolic process. And the body cannot run the catabolic and anabolic process at the same time. It can do it during the same day, but not during the same second. Because the pathways are the same. It's like a river. It goes from the high to the low. Or you can tilt it and increase one lake and lower the other one and have the river go backwards. But you can't have the river flowing in two directions at the same time. And that is the same time here. So you can end up in a situation where you eat so much protein, but now we're talking 3 or 4 grams, if not more, per kilo body weight. So you basically just eat protein. And then that catabolism will then be a little bit of conflict with the anabolism, and therefore you might actually have more lean mass losses because the body needs to also do the catabolic phase at the same time. It depends on how you train and how often you eat and those things. Because basically what happens when you ramp up those enzymes and then maybe don't eat for a while, then during the meantime you have a lot of enzymes that are used to break down proteins. Then they will take your proteins, because the body cannot just shift this in 1 second. It takes hours to days to ramp up and down enzymes depending on how you eat and also how you exercise. If you do this famous Sun 2 training, it ramps up enzyme to chop down fat, which it also does if you go high fat, low carb. It also ramp up those enzymes. So both of those two methods ramp up those enzymes. Then they still do it in different, there are other differences to them. So you can't unfortunately just sit and eat fat home and get higher cardiovascular fitness. Unfortunately, you need to go out and do the hard work for that. So yeah, to conclude this, I think basically stay away from the white space where you're too low in protein. It doesn't really matter how you tweak the other factors. You will not lose much body fat. You will mainly lose lean mass if you cut calories. And then play around with reasonably high protein. Then if you want low fat with higher carbs, you do that. If you want high fat, lower carb, you do that. It's as simple as that. They all work, and they all work without training, but better with training to preserve lean mass. And that also will make you not drop your resting metabolic rate, because that's the main reason for the drop during weight loss studies, is that you become lighter. Then 2 things happen. One is that you have less things to carry around. Just imagine if you need to go around with a weight vest on 10 kilos or 20 kilos. Everything you do is heavier, so you use more energy. When you cut weight, that weight goes away and everything you do is lighter, requires less energy. And then the weight itself uses energy, even when you're sleeping and not moving. In particular, lean mass, but even fat mass uses some energy. but lean mass use at least, muscle mass use at least 3 times more, other lean mass even more, because that is the organs and brain, they use lots of energy all the time. So therefore, it is important. I often talk about not losing lean mass but why don't you want to do that? Yeah, because then your resting metabolic rate goes down, then it becomes really difficult to keep that low weight on, because you just have to eat less and less and less to keep the weight. And that will be a struggle. So that was the conclusion, and I know this was maybe a tricky one. I warned for that in the beginning. I will do some more easier weight loss study. I will actually present one soon, where I do the opposite. I don't let an AI pick the best weight loss study. I pick it with my brain, because then there are some other criteria also, how easy it is to follow this diet, and was there any long-term effects, how many people did just bounce back up, how many could stay at a low weight. So please subscribe if you don't want to miss that video, like if you like it, and comment if you have comments or questions. I could imagine there are questions about this video. But if this was the first time you watch me, be assured to watch something else. Most of them are, the most comments I get is that they are easy to understand, they're not complicated. This one was not as complicated as I thought, because I said I will talk as you were researcher on a big pharma company. I maybe didn't go all that far, but almost. So thanks for watching, and hope to see you soon again.